keep saying that over and over and over again. It's like, oh, well, Jesus is just, it just fits in with all of these ancient expectations. Like, no, it really doesn't. On the one hand, it fulfills the prophecies, it fulfills the worship that's given to Moses and that then David and Solomon carry on. But it also transforms and transfigures that worship, and yet the church carries it. Right? It's like it's like, why do Catholic and Orthodox churches need to be so magnificent and gold covered? Well, let me read you the description of the pattern that Moses is given. And they shall make me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in the midst of them. Okay, so the Lord is going to dwell in the midst of them, but I mean, he's traveling with them in the desert as a pillar of fire and a cloud, which both of those are in the medieval tradition understood as Marian images too. Every time you have a frame for the presence, you have an understanding of Mary as she who makes him visible, right? How does the Lord become visible? They shall make me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell in the midst of them, according to all the likeness of the tabernacle which I shall show thee, and of all the vessels for the service thereof, and thus you shall make it. Frame an ark of setim wood, the length whereof shall be of 2 cubits and a half, the breadth a cubit and a half, the height likewise a cubit and a half. And thou shalt overlay it with the purest gold within and without, and over it thou shalt make a golden crown round about. It's like the rim on the top, right? And 4 golden rings which thou shalt put at the 4 corners of the ark. Let 2 rings be on the one side and 2 on the other. And thou shalt make bars also of setim wood, and shalt overlay them with gold. And thou shalt put them in through the rings that are in the sides of the ark, that it may be carried on them. And they shall always be in the rings, never shall they at any time be drawn out of them. And thou shalt put in the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. Thou shalt also make a propitiatory of the purest gold. The length thereof shall be 2 cubits and a half, and the breadth a cubit and a half. Thou shalt make also 2 cherubims of beaten gold on the 2 sides of the oracle. Let 1 cherub be on the one side. These are very detailed instructions, which is, just fascinating. It's like, oh, you shall have no graven images, except for we're going to give you deep, artistic instructions on exactly how to make my vessels. So clearly we're not meant to worship the calf, but we are meant to honor the presence with appropriate ornament and vessels, right? 2 cherubims of beaten gold on the 2 sides of the oracle, that 1 cherub be on the one side and the other on the other. So cherubim on both sides, right? Let them cover both sides of the propitiatory, spreading their wings and covering the oracle. And let them look one towards the other, their faces being turned towards the propitiatory, wherewith the ark is to be covered. So this is and then the ark is going to be the mercy seat, right? It is the throne of the presence, and is going to be placed first in the tabernacle, and then David carries it up to Jerusalem, dances before it, and Solomon builds the temple where they place the ark in. Where is the ark now?
Well, it depends on who you ask. If we're talking about the physical ark, or if we're talking about she who the ark was pointing to.
I don't know. Which one are we talking about?
Do we go Indiana Jones?
Oh, but I go Indiana Jones first.
Well, according to the Ethiopian Coptic tradition, that particular physical ark resides in Ethiopia after being stashed in various places along the Nile over the millennia. There's a national mythos, the national myth of the Ethiopian Christian civilization, which is called the Kebra Nagast, which means the glory of kings. And this particular myth outlines the meeting of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon after she arrives on all of her dromedaries from her Sabaean kingdom, and she brings, of course, with her spices and precious stones and other assorted gifts to him. Hearing his fame and his wisdom, she wants to press him with hard questions and receive wisdom from this.
I love this. The Queen of Sheba shows up and she gives him a test, right?
Yes.
It's a woman testing him on his knowledge of all stories.
Yes, basically.
How can anybody ever say that this tradition doesn't give women high status? It befuddles me.
women shit testing men.
Yeah, yeah.
Really?
Sheba shows up and shit tests Solomon for real. Sorry, not clean speech, but she does. She's going to test him. Okay, so she shows up and tests him.
So according to the Kebra Nagas, the Queen of Sheba, she meets Solomon. She presses him with hard questions. She's knocked sideways man's wisdom, and then of course he's invited her to stay because she's traveled a long way. I mean, this is not an international flight. She's just ridden camels halfway across the planet to see the man. And he, in this mythology, tricks her into breaking a promise, which, of course, she's made to him on the condition that if she breaks the promise, he can have his way with her. So she has been at that point unmarried.
There's a medieval tradition of Solomonic riddles and so forth, right? You clearly you want to develop this little narrative.
Different way of viewing it. Obviously, Solomon has all of these wives, hundreds and hundreds of wives, right? So she doesn't want to marry him because then she'll just be a co-wife. She's not going to be the wife. Mm-hmm. So Sheba doesn't want to be co-wife. She wants to be the wife. But of course, she messes up and he gets to have his way with her. So she falls pregnant in this myth and she returns to her own country with a son in her womb. And she leaves and Solomon gives her Levites to take with her back to her kingdom so she can establish the worship of the God of Israel in her empire. So according to this myth, the Queen of Sheba leaves with representatives of all 12 tribes with her, and they return back to her country, which is ancient Sabia. We would know that now as the borders between Ethiopia and Yemen across to Oman. So it covered a large area across the Red Sea. And so that's where all of these Afro-Shemites arrive and worship of the God of Israel. So this is the mythology that comes along with it.
If you really want to know the scriptures, you're I mean, I'm sitting here with multiple pages and such like that, and you have to read the bottoms and the concordances, and the expectation should be that these stories are constantly pointing to each other across the book. Yes. Right? It's like what we're trying to say of reading the Mosaic ark is multiple layers already, right? It's the ark that is shown to Moses on the mountain. It's this mosaic of references and associations and layers and figures. It's the crossing of these times, the time stories. It's recognizing, recognizing that the traditions are, there's this wonderful traditions going out into the technical term being the diaspora of the Hebrews into the whole ancient world. I mean, I, as a historian, sometimes am bothered and troubled. It's like, why does Jesus come when and where he does? It's like, well, look at the world at the time that he is incarnate. When he's crucified, he's got the three languages naming him as the King of the Jews. So it's under the Roman Empire. But the Greek, we tend to think of the Greeks as, oh yeah, they're in Greece and they're Plato and Aristotle. No, they were all over the ancient world because of Alexander the Great. And you know, because of Alexander the Great, the pharaohs by Jesus's time were Greek, since they're the Ptolemies, and Alexander's empire reached all the way to India. So there's the whole world had been brought into this network of commerce and storytelling and worship and law. It's not absolutely all under the Romans, but they're in this constant tension with their eastern neighbors. And if you look at the world in that map, Jerusalem really sits right there in the middle of all of that. It makes sense as a center of this peoples. And at Pentecost, when the apostles are speaking, filled with the Spirit, they're speaking to all of the people from all of these different nations with all these different languages, who are all there for the feast, for the Feast of Pentecost. So this cosmopolitan character of the ancient world is that world is what Christ is born into.
Yes. Well, Well, the nations or the Jews, it should be correctly said that they were Israelites that had
Good.
returned to
Yes.
Jerusalem for the feast. Because we're not just talking about the tribe of Judah, we're talking about the entire diaspora, which included any remaining Israelites from those 10 northern kingdom
Right.
tribes that had been scattered around. And the Jews or the Israelites that had come to the feast during the Pentecost included those diaspora that had been sent down to the ancient Sabaean kingdom, but it included African Israelites
Right.
who had
Ethiopia is
been there
mentioned
for.
all the time. I mean, it's
It's the most,
mentioned in
yeah, I think,
Habakkuk that I read the other day.
yes,
It's
I
in
think
the
it's one of the most
Psalms.
commonly mentioned nation in the Old
Hmm.
Testament. It was so important to the biblical story. So whether or not the myth of the Kebra Nagast is real, the point is that mythologically, these ancient African Israelites considered themselves to be descendants of this meeting.
Right.
And this is why they always said the ark is here, the ark is in Ethiopia, because when the son of this wild knight between Sheba and Solomon grows up, he says, I want to go and see my father. And she says, okay, you can go. So, of course, he returns. He travels back to Jerusalem to meet Solomon. Solomon sees him and immediately knows, oh, it's my boy. And then they meet together and he talks with his father. And, of course, they exchange training and governing a kingdom. When the son of Solomon leaves, again with some more representatives of the tribes to take with him back to his kingdom, he in the story takes off with the ark.
So there it is. They're digging in the wrong
So
place.
that's
It's not
yeah.
in Tanis. It's in
So
Ethiopia, and it's there now. As
according to their
yes,
tradition, it's still there. It's part of the liturgical life of the Ethiopian Coptic Church. They have a great emphasis on the presence of the Ark of the
hmm
Covenant. Every church in Ethiopia has something called a tabot, which is a replica of the Ark. They're covered, they're venerated. But of course, in the Ethiopian tradition, they're not looking at it merely as
copies.
as a vessel.
Copy. And it's not just
As
copies of Solomon's Ark, or which is
no,
Solomon's Ark was Moses's Ark. It's the
yes,
same
but they are
same vessel.
same vessel, but they are also very aware that that vessel was pointing to Our Lady. So
Right.
you see, along with this incredible veneration of the tabot, or the ark, you will see the emphasis in Ethiopia on Our Lady. She is everywhere,
Right. Right.
everywhere. And there is not one without the other. So, in terms of the African Israelites who adopted Christianity, they have carried with them a very strong Solomonic cultural tradition throughout the liturgical practice. And so, when the Christian church was established, when the apostles announced that the Messiah had arrived and fulfilled his had established his kingdom, Christianity found its way back down into the population of African Israelites, and they christened what they had been practicing
Right.
previously. So, and of course, this is the tradition that I found before entering into the Orthodox Church. I think personally, I needed to see it. I needed to see the Israelite nature of the religion in order to.
Right.
Um, but yeah, Our Lady is the Ark.
Our Lady is the Ark.
She is the Ark.